to thank Rabbi Zada for the invitation. It's wonderful to be on this side of town, come over the hill, be in the city. I mentioned that Rabbi Zagari knows me. To be honest, I came to know Yisrael in 1979. I was 14 years old. I was just starting my career in high school in the Mechina. And there were a lot of Persians, Iranians that were coming because of the turmoil in Iran. And even then, and this is a long time ago, Rabbi Zagari was a gadol. He was very involved with the Bachrim that came to help get them established. Rabbi Neuberger, Zichrono Livracha, who was the vice president of the yeshiva under the Rosh Yeshiva Zatzal. So he worked with him hand in hand, really, to make them as comfortable and as acclimated as possible. So to say that he knows me, I was just a young guy. I was nobody, but he was already in those days somebody. So when we spoke on the phone, I spoke with Rabbi Chacham Zada, we talked about the topic of Shalom bias. Shalom bias is a very, very broad subject. And even when I was sitting down today to put some thoughts on paper, I was thinking, where is the first clue or the first source in the Torah that suggests that there is a challenge when it comes to Shalom bias? What would be the first story, the first incident? And maybe you'll argue that this proof is not so conclusive, but after the chet of Adam and Chava in Gan Eden, so Hashem spoke to Adam and asked, what happened? Did you eat from the tree? And Adam said, Ha'isha asher nasata imodi hinosna li mima'etz va'ochel. It's her fault. That Chava fed me the fruit, whatever it was. That's a machlokas unto itself, difference of opinion. But what's interesting is, the Gemara points out, Rashi quotes the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, that Adam was a kafui tova, that he was really denying, he was rejecting the kindness of Hashem, that here she's an ezer kenegda, she's there to support, Chava's there to help her husband. There's some problems that arise. Adam made a mistake, he wasn't forced to eat it, and he blames his wife. So you can imagine that itself, to me, that suggests that there could have been, they had bigger problems because they were going to be banished from Gan Eden. They had a serious onesh, a punishment for what happened. But that shows you that there was tension. And I thought of another proof when Rachel, moving on to Parshas Vayetze, when Rachel was struggling with her barrenness, she wanted to conceive so badly. And finally she had Yosef. So she said, Osaf Elokim eskarposi, Hashem has gathered in my disgrace. So one of the pshatim that Rashi brings, the interpretations, what does it mean, Hashem has gathered in my disgrace? So it's a difficult Rashi when you read it, just on the surface. Kol zman she'ein le'isha ben, as long as a woman doesn't have a son, a child, ein lo b'mi lit lo sirchona. She'll make a mistake, and she has no one else to blame, because there's no one else in the house. Mishayesh la ben, when she has a child, tola bo, she can say, he did it. Mishiber kliza, who broke the lamp? Bincha, your son did it, it's not me. Who ate my favorite fruits, my figs? So she can say, maybe she was the one who broke the lamp, she ate the fig, she can say, it was your son. It's a difficult Rashi, we're not going to dwell on it, but again, that suggests that there's tension, meaning something happens, people are living together in the same house, and accidents take place, you break a piece of furniture or something goes wrong, and immediately the inclination is to say, why did it happen, and it's your fault, and you have to be responsible, but that again suggests that there isn't a natural state of shalom, harmony. That's what I was perhaps pushing, but trying to extract this from Rashi. In any event, you don't need to come on to Bereshis per se, because you have this week's Sedra. Everyone knows this Rashi. In this week's Sedra, Parshas Chukas, Aaron HaKohen dies. And the Pasuk says, Vayiru kol ha'ida ki gova Aharon, that everyone saw that Aaron died, And Vayivku es Aaron Shloshim Yom Kol Beis Yisrael, that all of the Jewish people, Kol Beis Yisrael, the entire house of Israel, cried. They mourned for Aaron. Rashi says, the men and the women, because Aaron was a Rodev Shalom, Umato Ahava, that Aaron was the peacemaker, and he was able to cast love, he was able to create a better environment in the home, being ish ishta, between a husband and his wife. So, what it sounds like is that without effort, there's going to be friction, there's going to be differences of opinion, there's going to be perhaps arguments, voices raised, blaming, pointing fingers. There's going to be a struggle. And it's not easy to achieve that level of equilibrium where there is happiness, where people are calm, when there is shalom bayis. So really what I'm trying to say as the means of introduction is that the natural state of affairs is not necessarily that without any effort, a couple gets married, mazel tov, and they build their home, and they're blessed with children, and they're underway, and everyone's happy. That's not necessarily the default position. Really, there are going to be problems. Naturally, organically, it's going to take effect. It's just the way it is. Shalom bayis is the goal, but it means that we have to work for it. It's not going to come so easily. And just one more point as a means of introduction, and this might be well known also. The Gemara says Masechta Sota on Yud Zayin, Darash Rabbi Akiva. I'm sure you know this. This is commonly quoted. Ish v'isha. What does ish v'isha, those words have in common? You have two letters that are common letters in ish v'isha. What are they? Ish. And you also have a yud and a hey. So zachu, if they merit, meaning that they have to work at it. Shechina v'nehen, Hashem is there to keep the peace. Lo zachu, but if you take Hashem out of the two words of ish v'isha, as you said, you have eish al chlosa. That's the default position. Because if you think about it, there's competing agendas, you have egos, you have different opinions. It's not going to necessarily be this blissful state. You come home, you had a hard day at work, it was aggravating, you had to deal with a lot of headaches, workers, co-workers, bosses, deadlines, traffic. Everyone has to deal with the normal ups and downs. A woman, a wife, a mother, also carpool, taking care of the kids, getting them off to school, taking care of the house, taking care of the meals. That's the way it's done. Don't take things for granted nowadays because usually you have a division of labor that everyone is doing traditionally what was once done. Maybe the husband is cooking, I don't know. The point is that everyone is busy, busier than ever. It's a lot of stress, and that's going to come out. Shalom bayis, again, is what we shoot for, but it's not going to be the natural state of affairs. And if we appreciate it in that way, then at least we don't feel bad when we realize that there is, at times, turbulence. We're not getting along. We understand that's not unnatural, that's natural. And it just means that we have to talk about it more and work on it, because without effort, it's not going to just magically appear. So that's the introduction. Shalom bayis, the quest for shalom bayis is nothing new. So, what are usually the stressors that interfere with shalom bayis? I don't know if we're going to make this interactive or not, but to throw out some examples. What typically is a major cause of stress in a marriage, in a family? In-laws. So that could be all relationships, finances. Typically it comes down to money. That's been around since Adam and Chava were banished from Gan Eden. That's the reality, that you have to work. What else? Many times it comes down to, we'll get to that, That's a major part of the shir. What else? Let's talk about even if you would go back 100 years, or 200 years, or 500 years, meaning that this is something which is a constant, it's universal. Raising children, I think that causes a lot of tension to kids if they're not doing well in school and what's going wrong, and you have to focus on them and who has the time, who's going to be the one who disciplines, who's going to be the one who does the homework, and that just decisions that have to be made raising children can be a source of tension. What school should we send them to? What's best for them? Should they go to college? Should they not go to college? I just had a situation. It was a few weeks ago. It was actually a Persian lady. She came over to me after the drasha, and she was saying that she's having this difference of opinion with her husband and with the child. He wants to learn. She wants to go to college. And how do you balance the idea of having a career and having a parnasa, a gainful parnasa, along with the mitzvos of being a frum Jew? I mean, she was very honest about it. But typically that could be a source of strife. I want to be honest, we're not going to be explicit. Taiva, maybe that's what you meant with technology. Lust can be a problem when it's not channeled properly, meaning it's not love, but it's lust. Gaiva, ego. Whose role? What is the role of a wife? What's the role of the husband? If the expectation is that the role is that you have to worship me, and that's a strong word, that's not a level playing field. That's really exploiting the other person. And when somebody feels that they're being taken advantage of, so then they're not happy. And that's going to come out. There's going to be resistance. And they're not going to be working as one unit, as one team. Instead, they're going to be at odds. So those are just some examples. And we can talk about them. Because again, I think that if we were giving this shir 100 years ago, it would be very relevant. We could talk about those examples. But in today's age, there are two new developments that probably are exacerbating, that are intensifying the challenge of Shalom bias more than ever before. And that might be a very big statement to say, more than ever before. I'm not saying that it's harder now to achieve Shalom bias than 500 years ago. I'm not saying that. But these two developments were not around, and they are wreaking havoc on the Jewish home. So you said technology, and I want to get to that. But before that, there's something else that I think is even more pervasive, or it's really the bigger problem, more than technology. Technology might be right there feeding it or supporting it, but this is something which sociologists and psychologists, social scientists, they are dealing with. And I have a lot of research. I can put you statistics, so it's not that I'm making it up. I'm just curious if you know where I'm going with this. It's the age, today, more than ever, it's the age of internet technology. We're going to get to that. But it's the age. It's a big word, meaning it's a word it's more common now because it's a problem, it's a disorder, and that's also a question whether it's still counted as a disorder. It's the age of narcissism. Did you ever hear that word before, narcissism? Narcissism is self-love or self-worship and egocentricity, but it's more than just a person who has quote-unquote a healthy ego. Because that's something that's thrown around, and that's more like having a good self-esteem. It's really a borrowed term. Healthy ego means good self-esteem, which is important. There's nothing wrong with that. That is actually integral to Avodas Hashem. But narcissism is pathological. It's clinical, meaning that it was considered to be a disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. And recently they took it out of the manual. It's called the DSM, which I don't remember exactly what it stands for, diagnostic. Okay, go ahead. It's basically the list of all of the psychological disorders. So for years and years, it was there. It was considered to be a real problem. And because it's now so pervasive, the easiest thing to do, instead of considering it a problem, if everybody's suffering from it, so it's not a problem anymore, it's normal. So there you can take that one out, which is a sad commentary on society. But I just want to share with you some facts. Now, I gave parts of this talk on Shavuos night to young adults, and it really is more geared for them because the information and the reality of narcissism is afflicting the younger generation more than, let's say, someone my age. If I'm already in my 40s, so everyone is vulnerable to it, but especially those who are called the millennials, those who were born between 1980 and 2000. So I don't know if you fit into that category or you don't. I'm not guessing anyone's age, but I would assume that we have a lot of millennials over here tonight, or some. So anyway, there was an article in Time magazine. After I gave the shir, somebody gave me the magazine. I was going to bring it, but I felt it wasn't necessary. But it was from May 20th, so it's about a month ago. It's really not that long ago. And the title of the cover, maybe you saw it, is the Me, Me, Me generation. Now here are some cold, hard facts. The incidence of narcissistic personality disorder is 3 times higher for people in their 20s. So you see it's really a younger generation affliction right now, which it doesn't mean they'll grow out of it. It could stay with them for the rest of their lives, but this is the new development that is 3 times more prevalent in people in their 20s than in their 60s. So in other words, if somebody was born in 1950 or before 1950, so they were raised in an environment, in a family environment, and they went through their school system where it's more foreign to them, this problem. But for the kids that were born between 1980 and 2000, it's very common. 58% of college students scored higher on a narcissism scale in 2009 than in 1982. So that's just another fact that it's getting worse as time has moved on. The millennials, remember, those that were born between 1980 and 2000, 40% believe they should be promoted every 2 years regardless of performance. So in other words, if you're, let's say, not you, we won't talk about you, but if somebody's, let's say, in their 20s and they're starting out, they have a career, and let's say their college career was average. They didn't accomplish anything. They didn't make law review in law school. They weren't valedictorian or all of those different magna cum laude, all of those different titles they can earn, special distinctions. They're just a regular college graduate. They believe that once they start the job, 2 years later they should be promoted, and 2 years later than that they should be promoted again, which means they should get raises. What'd you do? They feel it's coming to them. 60% believe, and this is very scary, 60% believe their guiding morality, meaning what really informs them when they have to make a decision. Should they cheat? Should they cut corners? Should they, whatever it is in their personal relationships, what's going to determine whether it's right or wrong? What will they do? Is it because of religion, because of the way they were raised, what their parents taught them? No. It's they are confident that in any given situation, they will be able to make the decision based on what they feel is right in the moment. I mean, we listen to that because of the way we were raised, and it's ridiculous. So in the moment, you're eating some harassment, to say, yes, it makes sense, do it. Why not? But that comes from this confidence, this overconfidence, which is the pathology, that they believe that they're special. So if you're special, you can't make mistakes. You're never wrong. So even if you make a mistake, objectively, it's a mistake. You don't have to admit that it's a mistake. You accept it as it was the right thing to do. You don't have to say, I made a mistake. In 1950, or the 50s, 12% of high school graduates thought they were important. Now this is very interesting. 12% thought they were important. Now you're talking about a kid who's 17 or 18. Now why would 12% think they were important? We're going back a long time ago. In the 1950s, we're talking about close to 60 years ago. So I was thinking about this when I saw this statistic. Now, if you were in, I'm talking about a secular high school type of setting. So maybe you were president of your class. Maybe you were the captain of the basketball or the football team. I'm using, again, secular examples. The head cheerleader. You were voted most likely to succeed. So out of 100 kids, we use an easy number, so you have 12 who had those special distinctions based on the award, based on the title, so they thought they were important. But everybody else who wasn't the captain and wasn't the smartest in the class and wasn't the president, so I'm just a regular guy. In the 1990s, and this is already now, we're getting close to 20 years ago, in the 1990s, 90% thought they were special. So if you think about it, 90% are not the class president. All of those examples we gave. So where does that come from? What makes you important? What makes you special? What did you accomplish? Maybe one day, we hope. We're looking forward to it. But right now, all you did was basically go through school. You haven't even graduated college yet. You haven't even entered college yet. Maybe you haven't been accepted to college yet. Maybe you're not going to college. So what have you done? Well, I'm special. And what comes from this, see, I could have shared with you, we could have talked about the symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder, but I don't think it's important. It's basically this infatuation with oneself to the point where the person doesn't even realize it. So they're functioning well within society, they have friends, and they're involved, and they're able to go through school and get a job, but it eats away really at their soul. I can say it that way. They lose their ability to make connections and to really have meaningful relationships. They don't have empathy. They don't feel somebody else's pain. They don't have that ability because they're too caught up in it's a perverse way. They're only thinking about themselves. It's scary because if someone is Shalom psychotic and you can see that the person is not balanced, so we put on our guard. We put up our guard. Somebody is suffering from this, and especially if it's so common, so everyone's walking around thinking the same thing, that you have 90% of high school graduates saying, I'm special. Anyway, what now would be the natural progression? If somebody feels, I'm special, so then what comes next? This is easy. And this will get us into where it really affects Shalom Bayis. I mean, what I've said so far already should put up the red flags. It's hard to have a good marriage when each person feels that I'm special and I can't really feel bad for you or somehow be no say but all take on your burden because I can't relate to it. Even though I see it, it's like it's some sort of sociopathic where a person doesn't have a conscience, they don't have the feelings. That's why it's so scary. But what would come if a person is so self-absorbed and thinks that he or she is so special? What would be the natural next step? What happens next? Well, if I'm special, then what? I didn't hear you.
They have a hard time giving in.
Right, so you become stubborn, and right, so that will definitely come out in the interpersonal relationships. They won't admit they're wrong. They won't, again, commiserate or have any sense of sympathy, empathy, but they're going to say, I'm entitled. Because I'm special. I'm entitled. Somebody is special. Somebody, like if you go back to once upon a time, royalty. So you believe in royalty, Malchus, even the Torah believes in Malchus, but even if you go with the secular approach, so then the king lives in the palace. Everyone else doesn't live in the palace. What is the king? He's entitled to live in the palace because he's the king. The president lives in the White House. The president has certain privileges that we don't have. He has his own plane, and he can tell all the other planes that they can't use the airspace if he's coming, and if he lands in Los Angeles, he can stop traffic on Pico, and the whole city shuts down. He's entitled because he's the president, whether you like it or not, but because he's special. The position is important. I'm not talking about this president as opposed to any other president. That's just the derech. That's the approach. The person who's special is given special consideration. So if a person, a regular average Joe, thinks I'm special, so I'm entitled. So I'll give you another fact. This is as we speak. College professors are bemoaning the fact that students are constantly demanding an A. Their work doesn't support it. The paper is average. Maybe it's below average. But in their mind, they accept it. They deny that the grade. They say, I deserved an A. See, when I went to school, studied hard, and if you didn't get the A, you didn't get the A. Rarely could you argue with the teacher. Rarely. Because the teacher was right, and she or he is the teacher, and you have to just accept it. Now, it's different. They feel that I deserve an A. If you are special, you're going to then buy things that perhaps you can't afford, but you feel you deserve. So a house that you can't afford, a car that you really can't afford to make the payments on every month, clothes that are out of your price range, but I want it, I like it, I deserve it, so I'm going to buy it. Now, if you think about it, what we've been going through with the economy since 2008, a lot of it was based on this, because people bought houses that they really couldn't afford. Once upon a time, nobody bought a house they couldn't afford. They understood that this is my range. And there were formulas that said that you can only buy the house if you qualify based on your income, etc. Suddenly, the whole system changed. No, we can give it to you. We'll sell it to you. Why was a person being so reckless? So you could argue, it's a theory, it was coming from this. It was this transformation of society. I'll tell you a quick story, maybe two stories, and just to show you how times have changed. I remember, and maybe you have the same stories, because I'm preaching to the choir probably, but I do want to make this relevant when it comes to the Shalom bias topic. I have, and this is just one example from when I was a kid. So, yo-yos. Everyone knows what a yo-yo is, right? They seem to, at least when I was a kid, they come in as a fad and they go out. So I remember when I was probably in second or third grade, this is going back a long time ago, and suddenly a kid brought a yo-yo to school, and it became like it caught on. And the next day, more kids had a yo-yo, and the next day, more kids. Now, if you went to the store, the local little drugstore, as we used to call it, they had different yo-yos. The best yo-yos were Dunkin' yo-yos. So it was a given you had to get a Dunkin' yo-yo. But some were just the basic model. Some were very fancy and they could light up a little bit. And the rich kids, the ones that their parents were doctors, or they came with the fancy ones. So of course you want, as a young kid, you want the same one. You want the nicest one. I remember going to the store and my mother taking us. I had an older sister. I have an older sister and a younger brother. We could get a yo-yo. I distinctly have this memory where she said, "You can't get the nicest one." And I remember in the moments, like, why not? And she said it, I'm sure my mother said it in a way which was a positive lesson, that not that we can't afford it. You know, we were not in the same league as the doctors and the lawyers, but some way to say that it's beyond us. I don't remember exactly her words. And it was a lesson that just because you want it, you can't afford it, and you have to be happy with what we're going to get. And that was it. And there were other kids who had the same ones that we brought to school, and there were the wealthier kids, and maybe there were kids who had no yo-yo. But that was a lesson. Nowadays, is it so pashut, is it so obvious that that lesson is going to be conveyed? I don't know. And this might be also a little bit more sensitive of an example. When I was in Kollel, and I got married in 1989, when I was in Kollel, basically it was a given that it was an oath of poverty, so to speak. Because how much did you make in Kollel? And your wife, if she works, she's teaching at Beis Yaakov, and she's a teacher, so it's a very small salary. So you get by. Now hopefully you can have this last for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, depending on how you manage your finances. But you realize that if you're in Kollel, you're not going to be driving a nice car, you're not going to be eating out at restaurants, you're not going to be going away for Pesach to some hotel, all expenses paid. I remember walking around when I was in Miami, when I was learning by Rabbi Zweig, and I would have about $5 in my wallet, and maybe one credit card. And that was it. I was getting by on $5 a day, whatever I spent it on, because I didn't have a lot of money, and that was a given. And that's changed. And it's sensitive because I'm not trying to criticize the Kollel movement. That's not my point. But somehow it's crept in to even the yeshiva society, where if you're in Kollel, there's an expectation that they won't necessarily live in poverty. Now, if the parents and the in-laws can't afford it and they want to shower the couple with that type of lifestyle, it's their prerogative, it's their choice. But then the question is, what message does it really send? I remember in Kollel making decisions that, because I knew it was not going to last forever and that I was struggling, so I was that much more careful not to waste my time, to make sure that I would learn as best as I could. I remember making that decision because the responsibility and the yoke of Parnassa was on me. So I felt it was a life lesson. But if somebody else was footing the bill, so then maybe it's easier to be less of a masmid, because there's always another day. What's the big deal? Someone else is paying for it. So that's something that has to be noted. It does creep into our society. Now, another point, and this will start to tie together to the Shalom Bayis, about these narcissists and the millennials. They are stunted in their maturity. This is very important. Meaning that basically, this is a quote from the magazine, though they're cocky, they're arrogant about their place in the world, they think a lot of themselves, millennials are also stunted, having a prolonged a stage between teenager and adult. And to put it simply, what that sentence is saying is they never grow up. So now you have to put this all together. We've said a lot so far. You have pathological self-centeredness. You have a sense of entitlement, which is irrational. You can't afford it. You don't deserve it necessarily, but you have to have it. You have arrested development, where the person is not really mature and ready for life. A teenager is not ready for marriage. A teenager is not ready to take care of kids and raise them. If you have the individual has the maturity level of a teenager. Then you throw in all of the normal, quote-unquote, normal strains and tensions when it comes to marriage. And we said the money, all of the constant demands on time. So what are the chances for Shalom Bayis? How's it going to happen? And I don't think it's a coincidence, and it's also a little painful, but I spoke to Rabbi Chacham Zada, I could be a little direct, is that you see there's a much higher, I'm saying this as in a general sense, I don't know the people here, and I'm just saying what I know from my community and from other communities, and it's out there. There is a much higher rate of divorce with younger couples than ever before. And from couples, I don't mean from couples, but they were modern and yeshiva couples. One of the hardest challenges that we deal with is girl gets married and she might have a child, and within a year had this situation. Within a couple of years, their marriage is over. And there's a severe problem with these cases that I'm familiar with the husband. It could be addictions, it could be something else. But you wonder, a lot of times it's just the chemistry that they can't get along. So why did they get married? Why did they go into this? Didn't they realize that this is a serious commitment? Didn't they realize the ramifications? In my day, a person didn't get engaged without tremendous ill. That means that they would work and they would think, is this the right choice? Because even though they're not married yet, and it's possible to break an engagement, but no one wanted to go down that road. Not because they would be embarrassed, because you just don't, it's a serious decision. So a serious decision, you have to think about it. Now it's very common. So that speaks to the problem. That's what we're dealing with. If you have a couple, and it can happen even when they're in their 40s, it all creeps into you can't close the doors and imagine that whatever is out there in the world is not going to find its way. It's going to find its way. So we're all affected by it on some level. So it's not a good recipe for Shalom Bayis. That's the first part of the shir. I'm comfortable if you want to ask questions at this point. I want to take it into another place, and that comes in with the technology. And I think you'll find it, I hope you'll find it interesting, but I don't want to push it unless if you have any comments or questions. I want to make sure that we all stay together on this.
What is the cause of this change? Just so that we know so we don't lose our kids.
So that's really where we're going to go with this. A big cause of it is the information age, which is technology. And the article talks about it. Now the article did mention something, and I'm not sure that this is necessarily affecting us as much as the general society, but I'll mention it because you asked the question, and it is interesting that in the 70s, this is sociological, in the 70s, there was more of a concerted effort to make kids feel good, to build self-esteem. Meaning, I think the old way of education was the teacher taught, and the kids had to pay attention. The kids that struggled, okay, it's not our problem. They got bad grades. And the kids that were able to keep up and do well, they excelled. And that was it. So if you got A's, you felt good about yourself. If you got a D, you considered yourself, okay, I'm not a good student, but it chipped away at the self-esteem. And it was the same thing when it came to sports, anything where the kids interacted, where they were able to perform, so either scholastically or on the field. So there was a decision that we have to make the kids feel better about themselves. So it came from a good place. So that means even if you didn't hit the home run, and you're not the most valuable player on your team, you'll get a trophy. And even if you didn't win the spelling bee, but you participated, we'll give you a trophy. So that's one theory, that they wanted to give the kids a healthier self-esteem, but they went overboard because it wasn't based on reality. So if you're told you're great, even though you're not great, meaning that you didn't earn it. I mean, everyone has what to offer, but if it really wasn't the development of the individual as much as it was just like an artificial pat on the back, so then it came back on them. But I think the real cause is the information age and technology, and that's what I want to talk about. This is really the main point, and then we're going to hopefully have some practical solutions. Am I still okay with time? Okay. So this is another quote from the magazine. Millennials, and this could apply to people who are in their 30s and 40s as well. Millennials are interacting all day with others, but almost entirely through a screen. So that's texting, Facebook, Twitter. Those I think everyone knows about, but I'll mention some others I got from the magazine. I don't know what this is. Fitbit? Did you ever hear of that? Place Me? I don't know what these are, but it's all different forms of social media. So I'll tell you a story. We just had a speaker in Shul this past Shabbos, and he works with youth. He works with NCSY on the East Coast. So he was at a regional convention for NCSY. So those are modern Orthodox or high school unaffiliated kids trying to make them frum. Everyone knows what NCSY is. So they had a regional convention, and they had 300 kids in a hotel. So it's a big event. And they keep the kids busy, and they want them to be exposed to Yiddishkeit and interact. So he saw one kid was in the lobby of the hotel, and he had his device, whatever it was, a computer, an iPhone, and he's there. And he comes back, and it's 3 hours later, and he's still there. He's still, and it's something, and the rabbi who's speaking is in his 30s. So he's closer to the millennials than I am. You hear that, it's so disconcerting. How can a person stay in front of a screen for 3 hours? Just sitting there. What are you doing? So the rabbi went over to him. He couldn't tolerate it. He felt it was such a tragedy. He said, you have 300 kids here at this convention. Get up, meet them, talk to them, take advantage of the opportunity. So the kid looked at the rabbi, I said, the rabbi was crazy. And he said, what do you think I'm doing? He was talking to the kids, and they were communicating with him on Facebook and Twitter. So in other words, and this is the phenomenon, that instead of talking directly, you're in the same room, you're in the same place, and we could be talking together. No, we don't want to communicate that way. We have to do it in a different mode, and it's a digital communication. That is a true story, and it's unbelievable, but it's all the data, it supports it. So, in other words, you're not communicating face to face. Now you tell me if this sounds familiar. I don't know, maybe it's not like this in your home, but I have this with my kids sometimes. I have older kids that have the iPhone. So we'll sit down and we'll be eating at the table, which isn't so common because we have different schedules, which is part of where Shalom bias is affected, where it's frayed. And we're sitting at the table. Now, I'm not that old. So you sit at the table, you have people at the table, so you eat, and what else do? You eat and you talk. I mean, you don't ignore the person. I mean, we're social. We're supposed to be social creatures. So if somebody's there, so you talk. I mean, to sit and to eat. A lonely sight is when somebody's eating in a restaurant all by himself or herself. You don't want to be that person. Sometimes you don't have a choice if you're traveling, whatever, but I hate that. To me, that is such a... I think I've done it once in my life, to be honest with you. I'd rather eat by myself out of the restaurant. But you have people, if they're sitting there and they're not talking to you, so I say to my kids, like, can't you just stop with the phone? It's not the addiction per se. It's losing the art of just normal face-to-face communication. Now, this is what I want to do with this. I want to develop this point because I think it really speaks to the problem of Shalom bias. Obviously, if the technology is creating an inflated sense of self, if I am on YouTube, because I post myself on YouTube, if I'm putting all my pictures on Facebook, and if I'm constantly commenting on Twitter, and I don't do any of these things, by the way, it doesn't appeal to me. Not because I'm a tzaddik. It just doesn't appeal to me. I don't understand why a person feels the need to do it. But if that's what I'm doing, and you have hundreds, if not thousands of people following you, and you're just a regular person, but you have a following, then what are you in your own mind? You're the equivalent of a reality TV star. That's what it is. Your life is now being played out in front of... To me, I'd rather have it private. Why does everybody need to know? I don't want to share it, but they want to share it. That adds to that narcissistic effect. I just wanted to put that out there. But getting back to the communication issue, what is so dangerous about this? Meaning, okay, so they communicate electronically. What's the big deal? They still get the information from their brain to the other person's brain. So what's the difference if it's face-to-face or if it's through a screen? Why does it matter? So I want to bring you just a few sources from Chazal, and I think you'll find it. I hope you'll find it very interesting, and it might be thought-provoking. Okay, one story. You probably know this. The Gemara in Masechta Nedarim. I have it here, but I'm concerned that we're running out of time. The Gemara says in Masechta Nedarim, it's on Tes on the days, that there was a young man who became a Nazir. Everybody knows what a Nazir is, correct? A Nazir takes an oath. He can't cut his hair. He can't drink wine. He can't come into contact with the mace or the corpse. So he came to the Kohen Gadol Shimon HaTzadik, and Shimon HaTzadik was really careful about eating the karbanos because the Nazir has to make sacrifices at the end of the term of Nazirus. So he didn't want to eat the korbanos of Nazirim because he thought maybe when they made the neder, they were in a moment of, they were very frum, and they said, oh, I want to be a Nazir, be close to Hashem. And then they regretted it. They wanted wine, and they regretted the fact that they couldn't get a haircut, so he was concerned that the korban wasn't authentic, wasn't really justified. He said there was one case of a Nazir who I definitely knew he was the real McCoy. He was a real Nazir. So what was his story? He came to Shimon HaTzadik, and he was Yifei Einayim, had beautiful eyes. And the Tov Rohi had a very nice appearance. U'kfutzosov tzeduros lo taltalim, and he had nice hair arranged in curls. So he was a striking figure. You saw him, and he wasn't just a regular person. He was a very handsome, very, very attractive person. So Shimon HaTzadik said, why do you want to now shave your head? Because that's what a Nazir does at the end. So he says, this is my story. Did you ever hear this Gemara before? It's a famous Gemara. Ever hear the story? This is very important. He says, I was a roa, I was a shepherd for my father in my hometown. I was under my father's watchful eye. I went to a well to fill water for the sheep. V'nistakalti b'vavoa shali. And I looked at my image, my reflection in the water. Upachaz ala yitzri, and when I saw myself, I suddenly became consumed with lust. And I realized that if I let this develop, it's going to destroy me. So it's a phenomenal story because he had, in that moment of weakness, he was able to summon the courage to challenge the Yetzer Hara in him. And he said, Russia, meaning he was speaking as if the Yetzer Hara was another force outside of him. He said, you're wicked. Why are you trying to elevate yourself in a world that's not yours? You're going to eventually become just a corpse that is for the worms and the maggots. I'm going to become a Nazir and shave my head in order to bring myself back. So Shimon HaTzadik said, this is a person who's really sincere, and he said, you're the prototypical, you're the best example of a Nazir. So it's a famous story, as I said. The question I have is, why did he suddenly feel so full of lust because he saw his reflection? If he was so attractive, don't you think somebody might have said to him, first of all, you'll say he probably saw himself once before, but putting that aside, don't you think somebody said to him, his father, his mother, somebody, you're attractive, tov rohi, beautiful eyes? He never was exposed to his own face before. This was the first time he ever saw. He was obviously responsible enough to be a shepherd. He's not a 3-year-old. So why was it that it was the reflection that caught him? I'll give you another example of reflection, and you'll see where I'm going with this. Avram and Sarah. What happened when they went down to Mitzrayim? They came to Eretz Yisrael, and there was a famine, and then in Parshas Lech Lecha, they went down to Mitzrayim. So what did Avram Avinu do? He was worried that Sarah would be taken because she was so beautiful. So what did he do? He put her in a box, and the tax collectors opened the box, and they said, here's Sarah, and they took her to Paro. That was a Messiah, and that was a test. The Medrash says that how did Abraham know that she was beautiful? Because they were standing by the Nile River, and he saw her reflection in the river. And that made him realize that she would be vulnerable. Her beauty would be very, very attractive to the Egyptians. Why does he have to make that determination? Because he sees her in the water. He sees the reflection. I mean, we're not talking about the Sarah herself. Avram's looking at her. He's looking at the person, looking face to face. So you can see that she's beautiful. Why did it take the reflection in the water? Why? One more proof. This is from Parshas Vayakhel. How did the Jewish people, Bnei Yisrael, how did they continue to have children despite the fact that the men were so tired and so worn down because of the avodas para? So this is also well known. What did the women do? How did they encourage their husbands to still want to have children? What? Right, but what else did they do? It wasn't just that they put on makeup. They had mirrors. And they would show themselves to their husbands in the mirror. It was to entice them. And Rashi says they would start to say, I'm more beautiful than you, even though they could see each other, but they looked at their reflection in the mirrors, and that brought about a certain interest that therefore they were able to be together and conceive and have children. When it came time to the Mishkan, what happened to these mirrors? Where did they go? They went to the Kior, which held the water. And we won't go into the rest of the Chazal, which is used for the waters of Sota, for Shalom Bayit, if there's a suspicion of adultery. But Moshe Rabbeinu did not want to accept the mirrors because he said, Sha'asuyim le'yetzer hara. If you take a look at Rashi on the Pasuk in Vayakel, Moshe felt that they were something that was associated with the yetzer hara. So he said, we shouldn't use it. And Hashem said, no, you have to use it. And you make it part of the kior. So these are 3 examples of where there is some depiction of the person, but it's not face to face, it's not real, it's through an image, it's through a screen, it's a mirror, it's a reflection in the water, and it brings about a different perspective than if you see somebody face to face. That's what you see. The Nazir knew what he looked like, but when he saw the reflection, it gave some sort of jolt to his Yetzer Hara. Avram could see what Sarah looked like with his own eyes, but when he saw her reflection in the water, it brought about a different recognition, a different awareness of it was the Yetzer Hara, it was a different look. And the same when it came to the Maras HaTzovos, even though it was a good outcome, but Moshe Rabbeinu realized that the reflection was showing something that was not really the essence of the person. Perhaps what we could say with this is as follows, is that there is the real person, and that when you speak to a person face to face, and you have that company with the person, you're not just taking in the physical, but you're appreciating the Tzelem Elohim, you're somehow detecting, if we can say this, the neshama. There's a deep essence to the person that cannot come across when it's just from a mirror, from a reflection. That is a very physical, lustful depiction. That is not the real person. When people are communicating and relying on electronic images and words that are not spoken, you don't hear the voice, and you're not really able to have that true personal experience, interpersonal experience, it's sending a different message. Besides the fact that it can be exploited or it can be inflated. The person can put anything and write anything about themselves, and if you read it, so then suddenly you believe this person is like unbelievable. But a picture can be manipulated. There's something conveyed in a picture that's not conveyed if you really meet the person. I mean, I think, I don't have to go on and talk about it. You probably have had this experience that some people are photogenic, and they like the way they look in a picture, and some people don't like the way they look in the picture, but yet at the same time, right, when you talk to them, something else comes out. It's either the chayin, it's something indefinable, but it's the person. So what we're talking about is as follows, that if you're relying on the technology for communication, it's not just the risk because is it a waste of time, is it a distortion of who the person is, there's something that comes across that's not real. It's something which is artificial. And it's associated, according to our proofs from Chazal, it's associated with the Yetzer Hara. So that can be a tremendously destructive effect on a family. So it's not just, I want to make this point clear, it's not just the absence of communication, so they go their separate ways, and they're basically roommates, the husband and the wife, and the kids, they're just sharing the same house. It's not just that. It's that you don't have the bonding, you don't have the real relationships that are being made. And if that's the case, so then they're going to drift apart. And then the Shalom Bayit issues will be much more complicated. Because they really aren't bonding together. You know, you're falling in love or you're becoming infatuated with a picture, with something electronic. It's not the person. It's not real. That's the biggest risk when you put this potent combination together, the narcissism, the self-love, and the depiction of the person when it's not genuine, when it's not really the individual. I'm telling you, it's interesting. Everybody is born in the time that they were intended to be. And this is going to sound maybe self-serving or self-righteous. If I was 20 years younger and having to date now, or 30 years younger, and having to face what these young kids have to do, even in the yeshiva system, with the resumes and the pictures. When I was going out, you couldn't get a picture. You wouldn't even, if a Rebbe read the Shidduch, if he presented the Shidduch, the way we spoke about, which is still important, because the Gemara says you have to see the girl, there has to be a certain, the image has to be pleasing, there has to be an attraction. But you couldn't say out of your mouth, you couldn't say, is she attractive? Is she pretty? They had code words for it. Lashon Nikiya. We would say chitzonius. It sounds foolish now. Chitzonius, the externals. But that was considered to be a very a very refined way, dignified way of speaking. She's put together. That's what she's put together means, that she takes care of herself, whatever you want it to mean. But the point is, we were very careful. Now, it's an electronic picture. It goes with the resume. There was no resume. Now the resume. And then if you're in the dating scene, if you have kids in the dating scene, and you realize how ridiculous it is, and sometimes the resumes become inflated, just like the Facebook stuff. You have to make it sound as if it's really great. If that's going to be the basis of the shidduch, so what are the chances that they're really going to be able to click? Once they meet each other, but there's so much emphasis on things that are not important to begin with, and then the couple's going in, meaning the young man and woman are coming in with the expectation it has to work because on paper, electronically, it looks so good because they have the pictures and everything. So then they're down a road that they can't go back on. It's very, very frightening. Okay, now we're going to conclude. I left my phone in the car, so I don't have the clock in front of me. But here's the conclusion. You can say, obviously, everything the opposite should help promote Shalom Bayis. Don't be so selfish and don't go on the computer so much and have an electronic relationship. It has to be more than that. It has to be more sophisticated. I'll leave you with this. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, "Im ein ani li bili." If I'm not for myself, then who will be for me? Someone could take that statement and say, that's what society is today. I have to be for myself. I have to worry about myself. That's narcissism. I'm most important. Second part of what Hillel said is, Ukshani la'atzmi, if I'm only for myself, then ma'ani, what am I? And I'm only a selfish narcissist who's going to be destructive and not be able to maintain relationships and have an unhappy marriage and not have a good relationship with family and co-workers. And I'm painting a very dismal picture, but that's the reality. But this is a very important point. Ain anili, really. If I am not for myself, ani. How do you define ani? So Rav Shimon Shkop, he was a great Rosh Yeshiva and Rav in Europe before the war. So in his introduction to a Sefer, he says that people have different definitions of ani. The narcissists, he says ani is me, and only me, me. Person who's a little bit more sophisticated will say, ani is my wife, and maybe my kids. That would be nice. If you get that far, it wouldn't be so bad. At least she's taking care of the family, the spouse. A bigger ani is I care about my community. I care about my shul. I care about the school I send my kids to. I get involved. I give my time. A bigger ani is I care about the Jewish people. So in ein ani li mili, if I'm not for myself, what's your definition of the ani? What's I? If I means everyone, so that is the antidote to the narcissism. So the truth is practically, and maybe this is anticlimactic, but it has to be said, is that a person has to broaden the horizon. Is that how do you define yourself? A conscious decision. Forget about the technology. Forget about all of the conveniences with the gadgetry. But how do you define yourself? if you define yourself in a much broader way, if you understand that the true definition of godless, of being someone important, really important, is where you carry the load of more than just your whims and what you want in the moment and how you look or how you want to be perceived or how you want to be honored, if it's much bigger than that, and it's not just your family, and it's much, so then you're, instead of focusing on yourself, by yourself, you're focusing on the klal. And by focusing on the klal, then everyone wins. Meaning that if you care about everyone, if you're part of the team is not going to lose. The team of Klal Yisrael is not going to lose. But an individual, if you only care about yourself, so individuals come and individuals go. But the tzibur, the collective community, it's here to stay. So that's a very, very important practical suggestion, meaning it's necessary. It's something that requires reflection. How do you define yourself? You have to ask yourself that question. And once you define yourself in a broader way, then naturally you're going to be doing things that are for others. You're going to be more considerate of your spouse. You're going to not feel the burden of taking care of your children, that it's impinging, it's taking away from your time, and everything is considered to be some sort of interference or some distraction. No, this is what I want to do. It's a whole different perspective. And I will say, and this is practical, and it's very, very practical, and maybe you've heard it before, but it has to be said, that obviously we all have the phones, and we all have the internet, and I'm not getting into whether you should have it or not, but you rely on it, if not at home, at work. It's the way we communicate. It's hard not to rely on it. Very few people can get by without it. But, having said that, you have to have time when it's not part of your life. There was a recent study, I saw this actually on the internet, but there's a recent study that they gave young people, maybe 20-somethings, go 24 hours without using your device, without using your iPhone. And many of them, they couldn't do it. They started having anxiety attacks. They said, I'm out, I can't do it. And they went back. They couldn't survive without it. And we have to, besides Shabbos, we have to find time when it's not part of our life. You have to force those meals and force those moments where it's just what we would call old-fashioned 20th century communication. It has to be. I'll just close with this. This is the final story. Okay, I hope you don't resent me if I spoke too long. But the last story. My wife and I, Baruch Hashem, we celebrated our anniversary, June 1st. So Shabbos was the anniversary, so we went out to eat. We had a gift certificate, which was very nice, and we went to the winery, the Herzog Winery in Oxnard. I'm sure you've been there before? Okay, it's a nice place to go if you want to go. 45-minute drive, Sunday evening, very nice. So I'm busy, my wife is busy, we're all busy, but you can imagine. Kanai Nahara, my wife, we have 7 kids, and we have older kids, younger kids, and carpool, my wife teaches, and we're busy. So sometimes I get concerned that I haven't seen her all day. What time is it now? What time is it really now? Well, it's really late. So I haven't seen her all day. I'm going to go back to the valley, still some work to do. Maybe I'll see her, maybe I won't. That's just the way it is, and it's not that uncommon. I haven't seen her all day, and we've spoken a few times on the phone, but nothing really face to face, okay? So we went in the car. It's a 45-minute drive. And didn't talk on the phone. I didn't want to talk on the phone. No texting. So we're talking for 45 minutes on the way there. It was like dating, the way dating used to be. Talking to each other on the drive. Then we had the meal. So it was upscale. So it's not even there. People don't talk on the phone. It's not polite. You have to go. It's a small room. You have to go out. It's a very nice meal. There was no rush. Cleared the night, and then we drove back. And so altogether, what did we spend? Maybe 4 hours together, an hour there, an hour back, an hour and a half or so at the restaurant. That's 4 hours. It was a whole different experience. It was a whole different experience because it was face-to-face contact. It was actually a sincere conversation. It wasn't texting. It wasn't just quick questions and answers just to be able to get through whatever we needed to communicate. and I said, oh yeah, this is what marriage is all about. And you got to do that. You got to find that time. And if you don't, then we're all very, very vulnerable. At least we have Shabbos, thank God. Because Shabbos, you can't do it, and Yom Tov, but it's not frequent enough. It's not enough. You have to force yourself to block out the technology. Not because of the internet's dangerous and what you're going to, I don't care, you have the filters, you have great self-control. That's not my point. My point is you have to not be looking at the person from a reflection. You have to see the person in the neshama. You have to really have that relationship. And the more that's cultivated, then the more there's going to be shalom bayis. There's no question about it. There'll be challenges, and you have to deal with the challenges. But it shouldn't be that these new developments in the world today really erode, and they take away whatever we had, the fighting chance that we had. It can't be. And hopefully, the Kodesh Baruch Hu will help us, and we'll figure it out, and there'll be Shalom al Yisrael.